Great. Thanks very much. And I appreciate everybody taking the time today. So the focus of my time is going to be in the area of hybrid cloud management. And, as I was thinking about what are the sort of content that we want to share, it kind of occurred to me that, there's a lot of noise out there and a lot of opinions and a lot of different, vendor offerings in hybrid cloud management. And so what I wanted to do is, and what I did do is really focus on, looking at a lot of the projects that we've delivered over the last several years and kind of really pulling out best practices and just what are the things that we've seen the most successful customers do in this area. And then hopefully help you with, putting together somewhat of a roadmap and a journey and, with some use cases filled in of, what's the best approach. Because I think at the end of the day, every customer is going to implement hybrid cloud very differently. But I think as you'll see from this presentation, there's a lot of commonalities in regard to the sorts of things that you should be doing, or at least thinking of doing as you kind of go through this kind of journey. So a couple, I think, big areas that I want to really touch on, or actually more than a couple, or what are the most common challenges that we see out there as it relates to hybrid cloud and moving down, and hopefully a lot of the folks here might even be able to relate to this. The first and one of the biggest is, people just don't really have visibility into their applications and its dependencies. As much as there's some really well-developed technologies out there to do this, most customers just don't have good visibility into what's connected to what. And that's a real challenge as it relates to driving hybrid cloud, especially when, you have very, very complex environments. How many of you folks out there, have invested in tooling, you're using different clouds, you have lots of different applications, just being able to try and pull all that stuff together to drive a hybrid cloud strategy is exceptionally difficult. And the other big thing we see is, everybody's automating. When I first started in this business, at Opsware, which a lot of the technology is based on, 12, 13 years ago, automation was really to some degree new in terms of bringing in automated tools. But now, in 2018, everybody's automated to some degree. But even though they've automated, there's still a lot of manual effort. We still see a lot of manual work and custom integrations that are getting done, and there's a lot of tribal knowledge out there. As much as people have invested in automation tools, it's amazing to me how much tribal knowledge still exists out there. And because of that, it's created really siloed support teams. And as you look through all these different challenges, I'm sure one or more may be applicable to all of you guys, but all of these, at the end of the day are foundational things that need to be solved before you can get through kind of a hybrid cloud, and hopefully this will help you kind of go through it. So I'm going to jump through a couple real quick high-level slides that I think are really, really important. And as we've evolved, as our business and what we've seen with how our customers have adopted this technology, up at the top here, in the red, we've done a lot with automation orchestration. And what we ended up finding was that you really needed to get deeper down into it to be able to kind of help and drive a hybrid cloud strategy. And so the first step of all of it always is got to be the assessment. And I'm pretty certain these slides will be made available, and we're happy to share. But what's most critical with any hybrid cloud strategy is just kind of getting that fundamental as is state, right? What's connected to what applications are out there? Because the last thing you're going to want to have is you start building or you start migrating applications, you start moving these workloads into the cloud, and now suddenly the ability to kind of drive good services for the customer degrades, right? I mean, I don't know how many times we've seen customers just haphazardly take an application, move it into the cloud, and suddenly all of our users are screaming because the performance is so slow, because they never really took the time to get an understanding of, what were the application's dependencies, how much data is flowing back and forth. I mean, do we even have a big enough pipe to be able to support this sort of a strategy? So we see a lot of very failed hybrid type engagements, mainly because they never really took that first step of getting an understanding of what's connected to what. There was no documentation that was ever created to be able to help with, figuring out what are the right ones. Which are the right workloads that are ready to move to the cloud. And if you skip this first step, I think what you'll find is as you move to multiple cloud providers, it's just going to remain silos inside the organization again. And you're just not going to be able to create a real hybrid cloud story. You're just going to be forced managing silos, and many of you may already be seeing some of this stuff today. So these are some slides that, as we talk to customers, that want to go hybrid, and it's typically because they have developers or someone like that they're building applications, they want to run dev tests, they want to build SaaS-based applications, they want to digitally transform, really whatever the case may be. What we find is that there's this unrealistic expectation that, the cloud's going to solve their problems, right? That IT process that they have currently right now is going to be fixed with public cloud. And as I'm sure everybody knows, it's definitely not the case. And we always like to say, look, hybrid cloud starts with private. If you're going to drive that sort of strategy, you need to make sure that you're automating way beyond virtualization. And I'm sure a lot of folks are already doing it. And when we talk with clients, they are doing it. Well, then they say, well, we've got scripts for this, or we have integrations for that, or we're doing all these sorts of things. Well, great. For you to truly be able to drive a strategy, you're going to start to pull this stuff together. You're going to have to start orchestrating these processes. You're going to have to start tying these different things together. Because the last thing you want to do is implement a hybrid cloud strategy and have terrible IT process. So when you kind of as a dovetail to what Eric talked about earlier around ITSM, that is a very critical component to the successful implementation of a hybrid cloud strategy. We're really big on our end of discussing change management and making sure that people are doing that stuff. But it's amazing how many times we walk into customers that just say they have these sorts of processes implemented, but then when we kind of peel back the layers of the onion, we realize they don't. And for any hybrid cloud strategy to work, you have to have private cloud down. You have to be able to automate and orchestrate at a high degree. And be able to high degree of competency and a high degree of repeatability, because just creating workloads in the cloud is not necessarily going to solve the problem. So how do we actually do that? So after we discover an environment, and you want it, and maybe you have your own tools, and we'll talk a little bit later about Micro Focus's tools, you really are going to have to get down to basics and start with basic blocking and tackling around automation and understanding and figuring out what are the pieces and the parts within your IT environment that you're going to have to automate to drive this greater strategy. And you see here, there's a number of different areas, right? From core infrastructure to the application to provisioning, of the actual virtual environment, the containers, to automating the process for application orchestration, right? Too often, we see people just get stuck with not understanding where to start. Well, what are the different pieces and parts do I need? How do I string all this stuff together? If I really want to drive a true cohesive hybrid cloud strategy, how do I do that? And that's where we always say, start with automation. Automate as much of that environment as you can and figure out which are the most important services that you're going to have to actually drive. Because ultimately, and this is my only marketing kind of slide that I like to show, because it's a great HP, for those of you that have been in the HP software ecosystem for a while. I always loved to show this slide, because at the end of the day, this is what you ultimately want. I want the ability to log into a portal where I'm going to have a bunch of customized services or semi-customized services that are going to be at my fingertips that will allow me to very quickly provision those systems. And they could be very, very complicated sorts of things, like a full Oracle application stack, to something as simplistic as, hey, I just need some AWS infrastructure or Azure infrastructure or something like that. That's the end game of what we're ultimately driving for. So some suggestions. So this is where we kind of get into a little bit more of the best practices that we've seen in very successful implementations with our customer base. So first off, you need to set up a secure and a solid foundation. Do your research on the different providers that are out there, and know that there are fundamental differences between a lot of these different players. The way AWS does things is different than the way Azure does things, is different than the way Google does things, which is different than IBM does things. They each have their strengths, they each have their weaknesses. So what's critically important is to really fundamentally understand what are the sorts of services you're looking to drive and what are going to be the best cloud providers that are going to help you actually drive those. The second bullet there, running load tests and understanding not only what you are doing but what you can do. It is critically important to understand, your applications, how they perform, and then ensuring that workload gets placed in the right cloud provider, and know your limits. Too many times we've seen customers just stretch the limits of what they can possibly do or set unrealistic expectations for, their applications and their workloads and fail, or worse yet, create a whole bunch of downtime. We just recently saw a customer that came to us for help, that had a big SaaS application that, they built on AWS, but as soon as they started adding in more and more customers, everything kind of came to a halt. And the reality was this everything the way it was architected in terms of the application all the way down through the infrastructure was just done fundamentally wrong. And so they ended up not necessarily having downtime, but kind of stretching the limits of, if we start adding in more and more customers, we may not be able to secure this. The other area is plan to scale. You really have to make the assumption that as you're building or you're migrating, these applications to kind of become more cloud native, to take advantage of those, different capabilities that are in the cloud, you have to build it to scale, not just at the application layer, but down at the infrastructure layer, and then identify constraints, and I love this line, identify constraints and build a roadmap to overcome kind of the stop dealing with it sort of approach, because we see time and time again, that, people go and try and solve problems with Band-Aids, that don't take into account the bigger roadmap, and then it creates more problems down the road. Server migration between providers is really, really important, right? We talk a lot about, containers and things of that nature, but it will be important that you take a good hard look at the tooling. And I'm sure everybody on this call has acquired any number of tools across any number of vendors that have out there. It is critically important that you do go through some sort of a tools rationalization exercise. There may be opportunities to consolidate, to get rid of, to potentially bring in different tooling, like a Micro Focus, for example, to be able to help you do that sort of stuff. We talked a lot about containers, or Eric talked about a lot about containers in the last presentation, and we see the same thing. Leveraging containers is absolutely a great thing. When we talk to customers that are really looking to drive, better application performance, faster updates to their application, they're trying to be able to automate their dev and their test to be able to, drive their release cycles. Containers is one of those things that really helps drive that, and we are seeing much broader adoption of containers. And for the obvious reasons, I'm not going to rehash, the stuff that Eric talked about. But when you're looking at containers as a strategy to be able to, to drive hybrid cloud, what that will force you downstream is to fix all of those basic kind of automation orchestration issues that exist, right? It'll force you to pull all that stuff together, because for container strategy to truly be successful inside of an organization, you're going to have to bring that DevOps mentality to the table. You're going to have to think like that. And we see more and more customers out there that are finally bringing their app dev and their operational people together. And containers is one of those areas, where, yeah, it was developed by, mostly by developers, but we're now seeing operational people even drive adoption more and more. And I think it's important, as you're going to go down into that container strategy, that you also start taking a look at that underlying automation and orchestration capabilities that are out there. The other big area is very, very important. You really have to define your critical services. You have to look at all aspects of it from a security perspective. And that's going to help you determine your workload placement, right? Whether it's on-prem, off-prem, whatever. And that's where that assessment piece on the front end comes in as being critically important. Being able to help you identify what's connected to what and be able to understand what's the performance look like, so that, and also from a data perspective, do you have any sort of data sovereignty issues or security issues or HIPAA concerns or things like that? So it's real critical that you really sit down and take the time to define out those critical services in the front end. And the final bullet here from the suggestions, guys, I guess I really can't stress this enough because it's kind of near and dear to my heart, is automate, right? Automate and integrate everywhere you can. That will be the fundamental foundation that's going to get you to the hybrid cloud strategy, right? You know, and this last bullet here I think is important. Custom does not mean manual. Too many times we see customers that just come out and start building out these funky integrations or these scripts or something that just will never, ever be scalable. What's critically important in a hybrid cloud strategy is, you know, we had one customer that called it the relentless pursuit of automation. You really do have to take that mentality and automate as much as you can, because the more you automate, when you start getting to a point when you're ready to release those as kind of cloud services, and I do kind of air quotes in front of cloud, it's going to be very easy to create those catalog items to allow it to be consumed by self-service. So I know this is a bit of an eye chart, and I apologize. We get a lot of customer questions around, we don't even know where to start. We don't even know what can be done. So what do we do? And so I like to show this because ultimately this becomes the foundation of a hybrid cloud, right? Build, triage, and request. Because at the end of the day, you don't necessarily want, it's just not about building stuff. It's also about the life cycle of it. So when I'm building servers or building applications or provisioning applications or provisioning services, all of those services need to have a life cycle. They need to have a beginning and they need to have an end. And they need to follow specific processes. And that's where this use case slide comes in, is to be able to get you a fundamental understanding of what are the most common use cases out there. And the cool thing is every one of these use cases are use cases that have been delivered for customers. So these aren't just kind of made up, you know, hey, we might be able to do this stuff. These are all best practices that we see customers actually implementing. So I want to finish off. So hopefully you saw from a roadmap perspective in terms of driving a hybrid cloud strategy, it really does start with assessment of an understanding of what you have. And just to kind of map it back to some of the micro-focused technologies that you guys may want to take a look at. The first one is the Cloud Assess. And the whole idea behind the Cloud Assess product is to do everything that I touched on. You know, to be able to discover the environment, know what's connected to what, and actually be able to create a kind of a cloud migration roadmap. The other big thing it does is it can go out and there are technologies, I can't think of the name of the product, I can't believe I'm not remember it. Cloud Optimizer, I think it's called, where it'll actually go out, tie into Assess, and be able to kind of help you figure out where is the waste. I mean, how many times when you're doing an assessment, you go out and you find all this waste out there that can be reclaimed and you can save a lot of money. So I would definitely I would urge you guys to take a look at the Cloud Assess and the Cloud Optimizer product. The other cool thing that we're really excited about, especially with the Micro Focus, you know, kind of merger of HP software, is now the ability to pull PlateSpin into this. Because really, if you're going to do a migration strategy and you're going to drive a hybrid cloud, you're going to want a fully automated way and a fully integrated way to get these workloads into the cloud, and that's exactly what PlateSpin does. And so if you look at how Micro Focus is now beginning to package up these technologies, they're now doing integration points between products that are very logically have to be put together. So Cloud Assess, integrating, you know, that assesses the environment, then hands it off to PlateSpin. PlateSpin then can do the actual rapid automation of the migration of the environment. And then finally, the last piece, because I know we're getting on almost to the top of the hour, then is the management piece. So there's Assess, there's Migrate, and then there's Manage. Because ultimately, to drive a hybrid cloud strategy or implement a hybrid cloud strategy, you're going to want to have some sort of a service catalog on the front end of this. You're going to want to have a portal that your users can actually go in and actually request these services. Now, these could be your own services that are being created. You know, we've done a number of projects recently where they're using the service catalog on the front end, but they may be using different automation tools to actually drive all those automated builds. I mean, we've seen customers use, you know, obviously the Micro Focus orchestration and DCA, those technologies. We've seen customers use Puppet, right? The DCA suite actually came out with a really cool integration with Puppet. So we do see a lot of customers doing that. We've seen technologies like Ansible that are out there, and a lot of different open source technologies. Even in the AWS land, there's a whole bunch. So the beauty of the HCM technology is that you can still go out and reuse all of those existing automated builds that you've created across all these different vendors, even if they're not Micro Focus, and then be able to actually serve that up in a service catalog all in one place. The other cool thing with the HCM is that regardless of the vendor, so if you're going out to AWS, for example, it's got the understanding to know, to be able to go out and see all the different services that AWS can offer and then show that up, right, in one single place. And the other beauty of all this, right, whether it's you use the Micro Focus technologies all as a suite or you kind of mix and match, you're going to be able to integrate with everything that you already have. And I think that's a real critical differentiator is you know, you've probably all built some really good automation. Don't throw it out. You don't have to. You can definitely pull it in. Again, our most successful hybrid cloud management implementations are ones where we can reuse a lot of the investment that the client has already done. Because, you know, if you think about everybody out there, you know, these engineers and the consultants, they all have their favorite tools of how they like to do things. Well, let's not break that. Let's continue to get them to be able to operate at a high level, but then let's be able to reuse. Heck, I've seen customers that had both Ansible and Puppet in different teams within the same business unit. And then we were forced to use both of those technologies, which was fine, to drive a service catalog strategy. So I think that is it for me. Hopefully this was valuable. And like I said, it's, you know, there's a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot of, you know, different methods to actually do this. So hopefully this kind of helped with some a bit of a roadmap and best practices to kind of help get you started. So with that, thanks very much.